Bulldogs.
Tim, can you just start us off with your keys to the game?
Ooh. I think a style of play matters so much in this game. I think if Georgia is able to get a lead, then they can wear you down and play that physical ground and pound, and I just think it's one of the bigger challenges for LSU is the way that A&M played them last week. It's actually something we talked about last Friday in our meetings, and then Saturday is if there was one area that we felt like LSU needed to be able to step up, it's in when someone goes right at them. They're so athletic, they're so fast. Everyone's seen Harold Perkins as a spy going sideline to sideline, Ojulari, all their speed, but I think the challenge is when someone goes downhill right at them. And which is funny because over the years it's never been something that's been a challenge for LSU, and I think that would be the biggest key to the game is whatever you can do. If it's you can step up and match that physicality, if it's you can get them in a game where you're more spread. I mean, look how well the defense played against spread teams. Look how well they played against Bama, right? And I think they play really well that way. They're fast. They can get to the passer. They can make plays. They have a lot of speed. But I think if you're Georgia, you neutralize that by saying we're going to go right at them. And I think that's going to be a massive key, whether that's adding another guy to the box, whether that's maybe adjusting, playing some more bear fronts, playing some, some under G, some different, fronts to get some big guys in there to be able to match that. And then really, seeing how Georgia plays that offensively. And so I think that's going to be a really interesting player-on-player matchup and schematic matchup that'll be fun to watch. And I think to flip it to the other side, I think, Jaden being healthy or not, I mean, the difference between someone that's at 75% versus 95% is a completely different offense. I mean, so many of their plays are made with not just him running, but elite speed. It's when a defensive end doesn't necessarily crash, just sits, and he's able to outrun him because he's one of the fastest guys on the field. And if you don't have that, now you're asking your offensive line to be able to now physically push around Georgia more. Haven't seen anyone do that yet. I think that would be a challenge, and so I'd say then, the biggest part after that is the receivers, the playmakers for LSU. They at times have been really unstoppable in certain games, just making plays. And then also you've seen them be a little off, whether that's just been the communication between receiver quarterback, route depth, or maybe just not had the opportunities. And so I think I think all three of those kind of play into each other, because if Georgia's able to play their style of ball, I think they keep it out of their hands. I think, and then if they can match that physicality, then I think you're going to see Jaden and the offense have to put up some big plays. And I would look for them to go after Neighbors and Booty and some of these receivers, Mason, and I think they got to step up with some massive plays, especially early, so you can play their style of football rather than Georgia's, because I don't think that's what they want to get into.
There's been so much made of Jaden Daniels not pulling the trigger, right? Seeing runners go downfield, and he maybe just doesn't trust his eyes. I mean, quarterback is a tough position. He's learning a new system. But What would be your message to Jaden?
I think I think it's a really good point, but I think it's a balance, right? So as a quarterback that it has the ability to run and make a play, sometimes the best thing for your team is to not take that chance. But then in a big game, against a team that can, chase you down, you got to be able to step up and make that, right? So when you get away with it at certain times, sometimes maybe it can create a couple of bad habits, right? Because it's like, oh, it was close, but I know I can go get a first down with my legs. But last week, the way A&M played him, he couldn't. And there's a few tapes I'm going to show tomorrow if he had crossers and there's guys with their back to the quarterback, and he could throw it, but he hasn't had to do that much this year. And I think he can do it from a talent standpoint. I've seen him make unbelievable throws at times. And so I think that's one of the things that he's got to do tomorrow afternoon is he's got to let it rip. and when he gets windows, and they're not going to be really open. No matter what Georgia plays, if they're playing their match, if they're playing zone, and I think they'll do more of it because I think they'll play a little bit more of a similar concept to how they played against Florida, because they adjusted because AR can beat you with his legs, and they said we're not going to let him. So instead of playing their match coverage, they played a lot of their zone and kept their eyes on him. I think they're going to do a very similar thing against Jaden, and they're going to say, hey, you're going to have tight windows, force it in there, and we think we're going to get some tips and some interceptions. So it's going to be really fun to see, not just the player matchups, but I think the schemes as well. I think that's one of the funnest things in these SEC championship games.
Having been a quarterback, I'm assuming you watch a guy like Stetson Bennett differently than we do. What do you notice that maybe I wouldn't? When you see a guy like Bennett doing what he's done for Georgia now for the last 2 years, what do you see?
Well, I think for so long he was just underrated, and people would throw around just game manager, and I'm sure that probably just really irritates him. And I think he's so much more than that. I think he's someone that brings a lot of energy and swagger and moxie to it. And I think sometimes because their style of play, he also doesn't put up some of the stats that other offenses would. And I think it's important to understand that based on your scheme, based on the time of possession, how they play, stats don't always tell the full story, right? And so it's, how do you best manage that offense? And I think he does a really good job, I would say. In a few games, you could see him maybe trying to create some big plays when he didn't necessarily have to, but I think that's the human element of someone that's trying to, go out there and let it rip. But I think, look at him in so many of the big games. He's really stepped up and played, some of his best and some of the best moments, and isn't that what you want out of quarterback? So he's someone that's earned a lot of respect from me and a lot of people, and he's just not someone that I would underestimate in a situation like this.
Tim, how much of an X factor can Georgia's tight ends be? It's just such a unique group with Darnell Washington, Brock Bowers, and those guys.
Yeah, gosh, I don't think they're going to be a surprise to anyone, because if LSU hasn't been preparing for them, then you miss some of the most talented guys in the country, and I don't know if anybody's going to miss Darnell Washington. He's how big he is. It's a matchup nightmare. Whether they make a bunch of catches or not, that's not the only thing that they're a mismatch in. It's formations. It's that they can go to the huddle and you could be two tight ends, but then they can go to the line of scrimmage and you could be an empty formation. And it's a nightmare for a defense. What personnel do you call? Are we treating them as base? Are we treating them as, you treating Darnell as an offensive lineman? Are we going to go big personnel? But then you can also treat it as nickel. And I think that's a nightmare. How do you match up against it? And I think, so no matter how many catches they have, which I'm sure they'll be targeted quite a bit, but it's just being able to get the right personnel and the right placement, and then how do you treat Brock? Do you treat him as a receiver? Do you treat him as a tight end? That's just a nightmare that teams have to have great communication. You have to be able to understand what personnel, and I think already going into it, that's kind of an advantage they have of when you got two tight ends that are so versatile. And I think it's something that Georgia's done a really good job of utilizing.
Tim, about the tight ends, just what does that do for a quarterback to have both those guys?
Oh, it's awesome. It's awesome from being able to understand when you go, two tight ends to a side receivers over, your ability to gain information, gain knowledge, understanding man's zone, how they're going to try to play you, how are they playing these tight ends. It's helpful in that way. It's helpful when you can hit a tunnel screen to your tight end and he can take it 80, not many tight ends, most can take it 8. It's you have Darnell Washington. It's like, it's someone that big, and then you see him hurdling dudes. It's like, this not supposed to happen. It's got to be pretty fun to have tight ends like that.
You had a chance to win back-to-back national championships in 2009, came up just a little bit short. What's your perspective? I'm sorry. Sorry to bring it back. What's your perspective on Georgia?
Talk about your worst days.
What's your perspective on Georgia now trying to do the same thing?
Man, it's hard. What they've done in just the regular season of going undefeated, and this is also how hard the SEC is. People forget they didn't win the SEC last year. If last year was back in the day, they're not national champs. They don't get to play in the national championship game. It just shows how hard it is, and that's why I just have so much respect for what Kirby's done. It's just it's difficult, man, and it's obviously why Saban's the best of all time. You keep, and it's like, oh, it's a down year. Oh, really? Because they lost 2 games by 1 point. It's a really hard league where you have so many teams that are so capable, and I think that's, we talked about this a lot last week. Is people are like, oh, LSU should just go out there and beat A&M. A&M has one of the top 15 best rosters. I didn't say teams, rosters in the country, right? And now when that roster plays together and they put it all together, that's a hard team to beat, And I just think it's just sometimes we expect it to just show up and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, it's another W. Man, it's really difficult. And you're 18 to 22 year olds and you don't always wake up with, it's not Madden where you always have the same rating, it fluctuates. And that's where I think, and I say that to say that's why I think what Alabama's done is so incredible and what Georgia is doing is so incredible, because showing up week in and week out and taking everyone's best shot. I think that's also important to understand. Everyone, that's their preparation, is they know showing up and they do it, and they do it with, different ways, but it's really hard, and it's something that I think deserves a lot of praise and credit because it's a tough league, and not to mention you got to keep so many guys healthy. You got to be able to, embrace the crazy runs of 4 or 5 hard games in a row. That's so difficult, It's so many times when we would try to do it, it was like, I know week 3 I won't be able to feel my right shoulder. Who knows how the ankles are? Like it takes a toll on your body, and I just think that's the challenge of it that Kirby's done an amazing job of.
Anything else?
Tim, I know you talked about the game you lost, but you beat my school president, Jim Tressel, in your national championship. So, but talk about the SEC title, your first time going, the emotion of your first
awesome.
time there. What are these kids for their first time going to feel?
It's awesome. It is such a cool environment. It's different. I think playing in the Florida-Georgia game helps a little bit because at any time it's always cheering or sometimes always booing, and kind of just understanding. I think, this is something that Georgia's been in a lot, the stadium. I think understanding the stadium, getting walkthroughs in it helps too. It's just a different atmosphere. I'd just say the way I always felt in it, it's just a massive amount of pressure. It's just an exciting, intense, fast game. Everything. I don't know if it's just because it was turf. It just always felt fast. I love the game though. It's really fun. And that first time we get to play Arkansas, that was a crazy game. And then the battles against Bama, it's just so much fun. And I think out of all the games I was fortunate to play in, these were some of the most pressure-packed, nervous yet excited, crazy atmospheres. Where it just felt like the momentum can switch at any point because you have so many fans of both teams, right? That sometimes it feels like a home game, and sometimes it's like, do we have any fans here? And it's just really fun atmosphere.